self-sufficiency among the people. The British occupation, a little bit good old days. Frankly, throughout that short period of the British occupation, the prosperous financial situation of the people of Aintab, and particularly that of Armenians, was restored to a certain extent, relatively speaking. The devastated houses were replenished, and the Armenian craftsmen immediately started working. Armenians, having barely survived the horrors of the Syrian deserts, hoped to live at last in a period of peace and prosperity. In October 1919, the Entente powers, for some reason, decided to concede the territories under British control to the French. The British were unhappy of this arrangement, since they did not want to lose a piece of land replete with natural resources. Thus, the British steered the Turkish and Armenian elements of these territories to start up protest and refuse the French mandate. Such a proposal perplexed the Armenian community, since they had looked upon the Entente powers with gratefulness. Thus, the Armenians adopted a position of neutrality. Whether it was the British or the French who occupied Aintab made no difference to them. The Armenians were only looking for physical security and peace. However, the British were unpleasant of the position adopted by the Armenians. In reality, the Turks wished neither British nor the French to hold the control. However, given the Turkish government's secret treaty with Britain, they preferred the latter over the French. In September 1919, French and British signed Syrian agreement, which stipulated British withdrawal from Aintab and the French occupation of entire Cilicia, including Aintab, as well as Syrian and Lebanon. The Turks noticed that through the withdrawal of the British forces, propitious circumstances will be created in their favor. Nevertheless, they never wished for a French mandate. Despite their efforts, the French entered Aintab on the 20th of October 1919, and the last British troops withdrew at the end of October. In order to avoid any interruption during the transfer process, which will be disastrous for the Christian community. The French rushed to keep the city under their protection through a small force commanded by the Lieutenant Colonel Felice and Mary that comprised the 412th Artillery Brigade, an African Hunter Squad, and the 3rd Battalion of the Armenian Legion. Legion d'Orient. On 29th of October 1919, the French commander, Philippe Saint-Mary, entered Aintab, a joyful parade and applause. The Armenians, as grateful people, contributed to the welcoming through a cheerful reception. The Turks did not participate, and they withdrew their quarters. They were furious towards the newly arrayed French army, whose considerable part consisted of the volunteers of the Armenian Legion. In the face of these developments, the Kemalist organization started to operate in Aintab. The organizers of the national movement of Aintab are Ragıp Bey, Police Chief Esat Bey, Dr. Hamit Bey, Avni from Maraş, Ashraf Efendi, Hoca Hamit Efendi from Maraş, Kepkepzade Abdurreşat Efendi, Marakzade Şerif, Körükçüzade Ahmet, and Ahmet Muhtar, whose crimes with Hüseyin Cemil, as members of the Union and Progress Party, known to the Armenian community of Aintab. All these names, they actively participated in deportation and the extermination of Aintab Armenians as of August 1915, and acquired a number of movable and immovable properties of Aintab Armenians after their deportation. And I went to high school with many of their grandsons and granddaughters. Amongst the moral supporters and financial sponsors of the aforementioned people, we remember from the Turkish nobility, Bazarbaşızade Nuri, Hocazade Ferit, Hacı Ömerzade Muhammed Ali, Kahramanzade Hacı Muhammed, and Halil İdrozade Hüseyin from Kilis. Behold, these and others with them were the ones who poisoned the Muslim population of Aintab with the venom of hatred and stirred them up against Armenians and French. Because they did not want to return the properties of Armenians back to them as a result of British or French pressure. That was the main dynamic which encouraged them to organize a nationalist forces against Armenians and French in the city. And then Armenian National Union was formed in Aintab, Its representatives were the following members: Babikyan, Levonyan, Arslanyan, Leylekyan, Karamanukyan, Cebeciyan, Benliyan, Nazaret Fıstıkçıyan, Bedros Milletbaşyan. Shortly after the French occupation, tragic events started to take place in Aintab. There were murders of Armenians, attacks of their neighborhood from November 1919 to March 1920. Turkish Muslim community was extremely disturbed by the presence of Armenian volunteer battalion within the French troops and made huge pressure on the French to send them off from the city. Here, before delving into details of the events in Aintab, I believe it's necessary to talk about two important commandants that had a great contribution to the self-defense of Aintab. Ador Levonyan was a tall, magnanimous, complacent, and honest young man. He was clever and quick. He was an audacious and laborious person with a military decency. He was everywhere. His soldiers loved him. He inspired truth and moral vigor everywhere. During an attack, he always stood on the front line and superseded his soldiers. He had a strategic aptitude without having any political one. Therefore, he succeeded in the former and failed in the latter. Let us move to the second warrior. He was the second complement. This person was of the middle height, robust and vigorous, and around 30-35 years old. Avedis Kalemkerian. His qualities included assertiveness, reaching to a level of stubbornness and sagacity and extreme audacity during the battle. During the critical moments of the fighting, when anger often caused miscalculations, his mind operated cold-bloodedly. He was the son of an artisan whose handmade objects were famous for their good quality. By the way, Cemal Pasha, the mastermind of the Armenian deportation and genocide, along with the Talat and Enver, was the main recipient of Avedis Kalemkerian's father, handmade tools. Their family was famous in Aintab. For many generations, the labor of Kalemkerian were regarded with admiration, displaying masterpieces of bronze and silver. Without ever being a soldier before, he displayed military qualities. During the war, the French mostly were located in the college and the Çiftçi Haraf. The college, later on I'm going to try to explain every single picture one by one in brief. During the war, the French mostly were located in the college and Çiftçi Haraf. The college, established on a small hill, was located on the western side of the Armenian hills. Whereas the Çiftçi Haraf, which was on the western side of the road to Maraş, fell on the northern side of the college. On the road to Kilis, where the Armenians had the overall control until the cutting corner of the transversal street, the following places were located: the Hotel of Beyaz Ahmet, where the French were stationed, the house of Shaban, Balyan's house, and the Akyol Mosque, facing the houses of Manushagyans and Babikyans, and the overlooked the glade of Aleven, the house with the balcony of the Feradzade, the Candlelit Church on the other side of the road, the row of Kale Agarush houses, and the Leylekyan's houses. Facing those were the Çınarlı Mosque, where the Armenians were, took over successfully, and the house of Nikokos Ağa, where the Turkish forces were located. The houses of Karamanukyans, Philippos Efendi Sarkisyan, the buildings of Hovsep Efendi Kendirciyan, and the houses of Kürciyan, Habib Efendi and Patanyan were located on the corner of the transversal. From Kale Aganush's house until the Patanyans, their buildings were occupied by the Turkish forces. This way, one side of the road belonged to Armenians, whereas the other to the Turks. The street of Kayacik overlooked this avenue and ended abruptly at the glade called Çukurbostan. Any attack on this point was impossible, whereas around Balıklı, the Turks and the Armenians also confronted. Half of the market, Armenian Bazaar, belonged, whereas the other half of the markets belonged to Turks. The building of YMCA and the houses of the Yakupians overlooked the streets. From Kozanlı Teyirbey and until the Sheikh Mosque and its vicinities, it was extremely dangerous for the Armenians. Okay, let's move to April 1st, 1920. Colonel Andres Battalion, which entered Aintab March 28, and went through skirmishes against Turkish regular and irregular forces, positioned for 4 days on the road to Kilis. The Turks had suffered more than 100 casualties and more than 300 injured. They, infuriated by this unsuccessful attempt, had come to depopulate the Turkish streets of Aintab after Colonel Andreas' arrival to the city. Colonel Andreas' battalion, after delivering the necessary provisions to the battalion of Aintab, headed to Kilis on the April 1st. Felice St. Mary remained in Aintab with a small force. The Turks had already made and finished their preparations before weeks. The Armenians were not yet suspicious of an imminent attack. Thus, a group of women and craftsmen had gone to the market in order to buy provisions. There were no sun at all. But all of a sudden, they began a surprise attack and assaulted the Armenians of the market like a wild tiger. A gun had gone off from around the governorate, and many gunshots had followed. The terror had begun. Wounded Armenians arrived one after another. The trouble has started and the war signal was given. The Turkish Muslims, before a couple of nights, had already withdrawn from Armenian neighborhoods. Some Turkish families were captured in order to exchange them later with Armenian prisoners. However, some Turkish families did not want to separate from the Armenians and remained voluntarily in their places. Various heartbreaking reports were coming, diffusing terror and rage amongst the people. A volunteer named Haygazun and his French friends were brutally murdered at the Suburcu Street. Their bodies were mutilated. A woman was injured by a bullet near Kezekteir Bey and was transported to the hospital. The Turkish Çetes, mounted on the nearby hills, were firing on the Armenian quarter. The entrances of the Armenian streets were blocked by high barricades. Secondary and third barricades, these barricades basically which were used to be called as tebirge, big gates. Secondary and third barricades were also erected. Firing of orifices were opened. All this was done very quickly. Whatever the people found, they were piling it upon the barricades. In some places, the old houses were torn down in order to use their stones and tiles for this purpose. The inhabitants of each street were working under the supervision of a mason, and behold, after 1 hour, the Armenian streets were turned into the fortress, ready to confront the enemy. This is exactly indicates how well organized they were. All the houses were connected together through narrow alleys. All the inhabitants of the Armenian quarter have turned thus into one family. One was able to wander the Armenian streets like a mob. Sometimes one will get lost by wandering in this labyrinth. For this reason, signs were displayed for some positions. The orphans found shelter at the hospital, whereas the widows and the orphan girls were placed inside the fittest buildings. The men got armed and were positioned behind the barricades, and fighting started. The Turks did not stop fighting throughout the whole day, particularly from the side of Sheikh Mosque and its minaret, from where they were shooting towards the Armenian hospital and orphanage. During the silence of the night, soldiers and guards were placed at various positions. This is how the first day of April ended. After a long discussion and being faced with all these attacks, Armenian religious, civil and military leaders, as well as Armenian people, decided to defend themselves. For that purpose, they formed a military body. Let us briefly mention the commanders appointed by the military body. Mr. Adur Levonyan and Avadis Kalamikerian. The other members were Hagop Muradyan, Yaksızyan, Cemelyan, Hovannes Merdakyan. The Armenian quarter was divided into 11 regions in the following manner, like the front of the Red Cross, Kayacık Street, House of Feraya, Akyol Mosque, Akyol Street, the environs of American Hospital, and so on and so forth. There were 551 soldiers under the disposal of their units, 63 medics, 81 couriers, and 60 corporals. Hence, the Armenians had a small yet organized military body. Everything was complete. The trenches, roads, tunnels, walls, barricades, and crossroads were erected. Everyone holding each other formed a united front against the enemy, who observed fearfully the barricade through their firing pits. The National Union formed a sanitary committee and appointed Mr. Pierce as its leader and Mr. Nazar Arslanyan, Sogoman Nigogosyan. Manuel Kendirjian, Moses Kendirjian as his assistant, whose job was to supervise sanitary arrangement and the hygiene of the city. Second, a labor body was formed, whose leader was appointed by Rupent Sülahyan and Merdenjian, Kabakyan, Saraydarian, and Kararejian as his assistant. Their role was to provide workers for fortifications. After the long war until April 23rd, it became one of the most victorious days for Armenians. A few men entered the Turkish houses, and however, after proceeding, they found themselves in Turkish position and noticing that a part of the city was completely abandoned and no Turkish soldiers can be seen. And they informed the situation to the military body. On that day, the attack started from the side of the Kelesh Hoca's house, where the Turkish Çetes had been positioned and firing for 22 days. Kelesh Hoca's house was located on the western corner of the Pasha Street. The Armenian fighters, after throwing some bombs at the house,